Jonathan walked up to Jacob, took the streamers from him, and pinned them above the door frame, towering over the boy as he did so. Then, he patted his head playfully. "Still got a long way to go before you reach my height, huh, Jacob? I guess you'll need my help to pin up streamers for some years to come." Jacob was speechless, and Nancy laughed out loud as the children went running through the house excitedly, picking up snacks to eat as they went. The old house was filled with a festive atmosphere, and Nancy smiled happily. While everyone celebrated, Brock sat alone in his apartment. He had been invited to the belated New Year's celebrations, but his family had never bothered celebrating the New Year, and he didn't feel at all in the festive mood. He rarely needed an excuse to party, so as far as he was concerned, there was no need to have one specifically to mark the end of what had been a rotten year for him. Since his father had disowned him, it had become impossible for him to return to Brazil. So that day, he remained alone in the apartment that he had once shared with Ashley. As Brock stayed at home on his own, he thought about Ashley. She was happy with her husband and his family, and she and Latham were looking forward to going on vacation soon. As he thought about his sister, he realized how lonely he felt. He had called Hannah earlier, but her parents still didn't think well of him, so he hadn't asked if he could go over and visit her while she was staying with them. And so he was home alone. As he sat feeling sorry for himself, his stomach grumbled, and he realized he hadn't eaten for some time. He made himself some pancakes, then sat at the table and ate them. After he finished his breakfast, he scrolled through his social media accounts on his phone. Almost all of his contacts had posted pictures and videos of them with their families. It seemed as if he were the only lonely person in the world. He sighed and put his phone down with a thought. "I might as well go to work," he thought. But then he remembered it was the weekend, and nobody would be working that day. He called Hannah again. That morning, Hannah went to the cemetery with her parents to visit her brother's grave. They brushed away the dead leaves around his headstone and laid some fresh flowers on it. Hannah was about to say a few words when her phone rang. It was not the time or place to take a phone call, and her parents frowned at her, so she quickly rejected the call and put her phone on silent mode. The family stayed at the cemetery for about an hour, and then they drove back home. Hannah returned to her room and checked her phone. There were 5 missed calls, all from Brock. He had left a few voice messages too, and she listened to them, one by one. "Hey, Hannah. I'm home alone. This apartment feels big and empty and cold." "Hey, Han, me again. Everyone's with their families, but I have no one to be with. Ashley's at the Thom's place, and she's even taken Cleo with her. I don't have any other relatives. Only you. Hannah, can you call me back?" By the third message, Hannah thought Brock was beginning to sound agitated. She pictured him sitting alone in his apartment, and she felt sorry for him. She dialed his number, and he answered immediately, as if he'd been waiting by his phone for her call. "Hey, Han, what have you been up to?" "I went to the cemetery with my folks to see my brother." "Oh, I'm sorry if I disturbed you." He sounded sympathetic. "I've been feeling a bit lonely, but I guess I'll be back to work soon." Hannah's heart melted at the desolate tone of his voice. "How about I find some time to come see you?" "Sure, that'd be great. Can you come now?" Hannah laughed. The enthusiasm in his voice was heartening, but it also seemed a little sad. "Okay, I'll tell Mom and Dad, but they might not be too thrilled to know that I'm with you." "Tell them that an old school friend came back to town for a bit and wants to meet you," Brock suggested, thinking quickly. "I'll come pick you up. Go to the underground parking lot." "Okay, but where are we going?" She sounded a little tentative. "Home." He paused for a moment. "Our old home." Hannah felt a shiver run up her spine. "Let me go and speak with my folks." She hung up the phone and walked to the living room. For some reason, she felt a little nervous. She had made up her mind to get back with Brock, but because she couldn't bear children, she was worried deep down that their future together might not be perfect. But at that particular moment, she didn't want him to be alone. So she faced her parents. "Dad, Mom, an old high school friend of mine just got in touch. She's back in town for a bit and wants to catch up. Mind if I go?" "Oh, is it Poppy?" her mother asked. I liked her. "No, Mom, it's not Poppy. It's someone else." "Oh, okay. Well, sure, honey. You go and have fun. But don't be too late coming home." Hannah hadn't expected her parents to be so receptive to her request, and she heaved a sigh of relief and hurried back to her room before they could change their minds. She sent a text message to Brock. "All good. They bought it." His reply came 2 seconds later. "I'm on my way. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Hannah put on her warm puffer jacket and a scarf and then said goodbye to her parents and left the apartment. As soon as she exited the elevator, she saw Brock waiting for her at the entrance. He gave her a hug, and she felt especially warm in his arms and her down jacket. He held her tightly. "Oh, Han, it's so good to see you." She was happy to be held in his embrace for as long as he wanted. Finally, he let her go, and they headed to his car. On the way to the apartment, they stopped at the grocery store to buy some provisions for lunch. Then, as they pulled up outside their old home, the memories came flooding back, taking Hannah's breath away. They had only lived there together for a few months, but in that short time, Hannah had had the best time of her life. As she stepped over the threshold once again, it dawned on her that in all her years, she had never experienced anything so profound as her short marriage to Brock. As if he sensed her emotions, Brock put down the shopping bags and gently pulled her inside and toward the main bedroom. "Look, everything's just as it was. Even the curtains are the same." Hannah's eyes swept around the room, and she saw that he was right. Nothing had changed. A strange emotion rolled around in her heart, and she didn't know if it was joy, sorrow, or something else entirely. Brock helped her to take off her scarf and coat, and he hung them on the coat rack in the hallway. Then, he led her to the couch in the living room and told her to take a seat. "I'm going to fix us a stir-fry for lunch." "Sounds good." She thought back to the days when they had been married. He had always been a good cook, and stir-fries were one of his specialties. He headed off to the kitchen and began to prepare the food. Hannah didn't want to stay in the living room by herself, so she followed him into the kitchen and asked if he needed any help. She washed the vegetables, and he threw them into a pan. They worked well together, and Hannah felt the spark between them. Soon, the delicious aromas of the food wafted through the kitchen, and Hannah realized just how hungry she was. Brock turned to her, and they caught each other's eye. His chest filled with an indescribable ache, and he put down his wooden spatula and hugged her again. She felt the firmness of his body against hers, and she melted into his embrace. He kissed her ear, and she felt the bolt of electricity shoot through her body. Brock held Hannah tightly, and neither of them spoke. Their hearts beat in time with one another, and the stir-fry began to sizzle as the heat in the room intensified. "The stir-fry," Hannah said, worried it might stick to the pan and burn. He let her go and kissed her on the forehead. Then he returned to the stove and tossed the vegetables one more time. Happy that the meal was ready, he took the pan to the dining table and started to serve up. With 2 steaming plates of food, they were about to sit down to eat when Brock had an idea. He went back to the kitchen and returned with a bottle of red wine. He opened the bottle and poured a glass for Hannah and one for himself. He raised his glass and looked her in the eye. "Cheers." She raised her glass and stared back at him. She could see the anticipation in his eyes. "I wish we could do this every day," he said, and her heart skipped a beat. He clinked his wine glass against hers and took a sip, not taking his eyes off her for even a second. Hannah followed suit and took a sip of her wine. Then, they both dug into their meal. Brock's earlier loneliness melted away, and he savored the delicious feeling of having the company of someone whom he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. Hannah sipped her wine and felt the effect of the alcohol go to her head. The wine was helping her relax, so she didn't refuse when Brock poured her a second glass. He also refilled his own glass. "So, how about we spend the next few days together? Do you have any plans?" "No. I just finished my latest project, so I was going to submit it and stick around for the competition results to come out. If I win an award, I should be able to sign with a better publisher. I'm enjoying this freelance writing." "That's amazing, and I'm sure you'll win a prize." He took another sip of his wine and looked at her admiringly. "I don't know how you come up with the things you write about. If you asked me to have a go, I wouldn't be able to think of anything." Hannah chuckled. "But you know how to manage a company. That's something I've never been able to do." "You could easily run a company." Then, for the first time, he lowered his eyes and looked away in shame. "I can't even keep the home that I bought for us." Hannah gave him a sympathetic look. He sighed sadly. "You know I had to sell our villa." Under the light that streamed in through the window, Hannah could see every line on his furrowed brow. He looked defeated. She felt sorry for him, and she couldn't bear to see him in that way. She decided she wouldn't make him wait any longer. "Actually, the villa's still ours." "What do you mean?" Brock gave her a quizzical look, and she thought she detected a hint of hope in his face. She pondered for a moment, and then she had an idea. "After lunch, let's go to the villa. Maybe we can buy some firecrackers and set them off to celebrate that we're together again." "But Hannah, I no longer own the villa. I won't be able to get into the complex, much less the house." "That's okay. I have a friend who lives there. She'll let us in." Hannah felt pleased with herself for coming up with that little white lie on the spot. Brock could see that she was determined to go, so he gave in. "Okay. In that case, who am I to argue? I'll call a taxi, because neither of us can drive after half a bottle of red wine." They had to wait a while for a taxi, but after 20 minutes the car finally arrived. They both climbed into the back seat, and Brock held Hannah's hand in his lap. She had drunk 2 glasses of wine, and although her head was feeling a little dizzy, her mind was still clear. She leaned on his shoulder. "Would you buy the house back if you could?" "In a heartbeat. But I don't think that's going to happen now." He sighed and looked out the window. "I wonder what the new owners have done with it. I hope they haven't changed it too much." He had designed and carefully selected the interior decor himself, and he had regretted that he and Hannah had only been able to spend one night there. "We can go and take a look later." She squeezed his hand, and he gazed out of the car window. She could feel his melancholy. He saw a store selling firecrackers and told the driver to stop and wait for them while they went inside. They chose a colorful box of firecrackers, and then they hurried back to the taxi. When they reached the entrance to the gated community, Hannah got out of the car and spoke to the security guards. Brock had no idea what she said to them, but they opened the gates and let them in. The taxi driver dropped them off outside their old house. They paid him, and then he drove back down the road and out of the gates. "Shall we take a look?" Hannah asked. "I doubt there'll be anyone home. The new owners probably haven't moved in yet. We can set the fireworks off in the sports field." Brock was uncertain, and he made his feelings known. "This feels weird. I'm not sure we should be doing this." But he tentatively followed her up the long driveway with the box of firecrackers under his arm. As they got closer to the villa, a look of disappointment and regret showed on his face. But still, Hannah didn't give anything away. She walked up to the fingerprint identification pad and placed her forefinger on it. "What are you doing?" Brock asked incredulously. "It's not going to open for you. And even if it did, what if the people are home? They'll think we're burglars." But just then, the door clicked open. Brock's jaw dropped in disbelief, and he stared at Hannah in confusion. If he had used his own fingerprints to open the door, he might have assumed that the new owners hadn't yet gotten around to erasing them. But Hannah had used hers, and they had never been recorded in the keypad's memory. "Hannah, what's going on?" A thought came to his mind, but he couldn't bring himself to say it out loud. A smile formed on her lips, and her eyes signaled to Brock to enter. Come in and take a look around." His heart pounded in his chest. He didn't dare believe what he so badly wanted to believe. He held his breath as he stepped over the threshold into his old villa and looked around. The carpet, the couch, the chandelier that hung from the hallway ceiling, and all the furniture in the living room were just as he had left them. Apart from the objects that his father had broken, everything in the room was just as he remembered. Brock stared blankly for several seconds before he turned and looked at Hannah, who had remained behind him as he took in the sight of his beautifully styled former home. There was a hint of a smile in her eyes. He loved to see her smile. When they were married, she had rarely done so because of all of his problems, so to see her smile right there in the villa was all the more poignant. He pulled her into his embrace, and she felt his heartbeat pounding against her chest. "Hannah, meeting you was the greatest thing I've ever done in my life." Meeting Hannah was truly the best thing that had ever happened to Brock. His mother died, and his sister was a married woman, so his life had become quite lonely since he and Hannah had separated. Throughout his entire 30 years of life, he had never enjoyed a father's love. His family had always been cold or scheming against each other. But Hannah was a ray of light that lit up his world. He knew he had hurt her, but in the end, she was still willing to be a big part of his life. He hugged her tightly and then released her and looked into her eyes. "Did Jonathan help you buy it?" "Yes," she nodded. "Actually, I wasn't going to tell you at first. I was thinking that I'd wait until you have the money to buy it back, but I had no idea it meant so much to you." He looked at her apologetically. "I'm so sorry you had to beg another man to help keep our home." "It's not your fault. You have your father to thank for that." She smiled sympathetically. "It's all right. I'm sure you'll be able to buy it back within a few years." Brock's eyes filled with a rare confidence. "Oh, I promise you it won't take that long. I'm going to buy it back before this year is out." "But your company's still recovering. Will you—" But before she could finish speaking, he interrupted her. "Trust me, I'll make it happen." Hannah believed that he meant what he said. He would do whatever it took to buy the house back. "Oh, I just remembered," she said suddenly. "The fireworks are still outside." "I'll bring them in." Brock went outside and brought the box of firecrackers into the house. "Let's set them off later tonight when it's dark." He took her in his arms again. "The last time you came to the villa, I was drunk, and I didn't show you around properly. Let me give you a tour now." He led her upstairs. Hannah laughed. "Have you forgotten who got us into the house tonight? I've already been here, remember?" Only then did he remember that she had unlocked the front door with her fingerprints, so she must have been around the house before. Feeling a little foolish, he led her back downstairs again. They sat on the couch and turned on the television. He moved closer to her and put his arm around her. The TV was showing a romantic comedy, but before Hannah could see what was happening in the movie, Brock turned her head and planted a kiss on her lips. He held her head in his hands and kissed her deeper. His movements were gentle and intimate, and she felt a tingle through her spine. The effects of the wine she had drunk earlier had long worn off, but somehow she still felt a little tipsy, especially when he opened her mouth wider and their tongues met. Hannah felt herself sliding down onto the couch as Brock's body pressed heavily against hers. Lying prone on the cushions, she recovered her senses and gently pushed him away. "What are you planning on doing right now?" His eyes twinkled, and she felt as if they were sucking her in. "What do you think I plan on doing?" Hannah pulled herself upright. "I'd like to set off the fireworks first." "But it's still light outside. Let's go up to the bedroom for a while. We'll do the fireworks when it's dark." He leaned over and kissed her again, and Hannah lost herself in the passion of the moment. She had no idea how they got to the bedroom, but she found herself lying on the bed with Brock on top of her. "My mom told me not to get home too late," she said, her voice hoarse. "I promise you'll be home before 10 o'clock. When Hannah awoke, it was dark outside, and she wondered how long she had been asleep. She reached out to the other side of the bed, but it was empty. She stumbled out of bed and put on her clothes. The aroma of food wafted up the stairs, and her stomach grumbled. She headed downstairs and found Brock in the kitchen, humming happily to himself. "Hey, you're just in time. Are you hungry? I ordered takeout and it just arrived." He removed the containers from the bag and took them to the dining table. Hannah sat at the table and let him serve her. They sat opposite each other and began to eat. "We should go and set off the fireworks as soon as we've eaten," Brock said cheerfully. "Sure." She felt a little vexed, but she couldn't put her finger on why. Brock smiled excitedly. The melancholy in his eyes had well and truly gone. "Let's go." They finished their meal and went to put on their warm coats. Brock held Hannah into hers, and then he wrapped her up in a scarf and placed a woolen hat on her head. When they were both ready, they left the villa and headed to the sports field within the gated community. They found an empty bench, and Hannah sat down while Brock took the box of fireworks and set them down at a safe distance. It was a little after 7 o'clock, and the night sky was a deep blue. Stars twinkled, and Hannah could see the vapor of her breath in the cold air. Brock chose a firecracker from the box and stuck it into the firm ground. He fumbled in his coat pocket and found a lighter, and ran back to join Hannah on the bench. Colorful sparks shot up into the dark sky, and then they fizzled out. Brock frowned. One's obviously not enough. He took out several more of the same type and lined them up in a row. He quickly lit them, one after another, and sat back down with Hannah. A curtain of light shot up into the air and cascaded down like a waterfall, filling the sky with an array of colors. Hannah hadn't seen fireworks for several years, and she gazed up at them in delight. She had taken Brock there just to show him that the home he had bought for them was still theirs. Holding their own little firecracker display there seemed all the more fitting. It warmed her heart to see how happy it had made him. As the shower of light faded, Brock handed her a sparkler. "Let me light it for you." He lit the end, and it began to crackle and spit out little sparks of white light as it burned. Hannah drew circles in the air, leaving behind a trail of light until it burned out and went dark. Brock lit another sparkler and placed it in her hand. Then he embraced her from behind, and taking a hold of her hand that held the sparkler, he drew a heart in the air with the tail of the light. Inside the heart, he wrote the letters B and H. Hannah turned and looked up into his face with a soft smile. He returned the smile and lowered his head, kissing her fully on the lips. The sparkler burned out, and Brock took out another firework from the box and stuck it into the ground. He passed the lighter to Hannah. "Want to light it?" Her heart leaped as she took the lighter from him. Tentatively, she lit the firecracker and ran back into his arms with a squeal, afraid it would explode too soon. He laughed and hugged her tightly. Then, the two of them watched as the fountain of color shot into the air, both feeling happier than they had felt in a long time. On the other side of New York, Steve and Helga were also gazing into the sky. Sophia thought that her son still had no intention of settling down with a girlfriend. She had spent her life trying to raise a well-rounded young man, but she felt as if she had failed dismally. She knew that Steve was seeing Helga, but so far she hadn't seen much in the way of intimacy or even commitment between them. Her son had always been distant and aloof, and Sophia was afraid he would end up driving Helga away. She didn't know what happened after the young couple had left the Davis mansion. Helga turned to Steve. "So, where shall we go?" It was early in the evening, but the sky was already dark. Some of Steve's old college friends had mentioned a festival of lights that was taking place that evening, and he thought that might be fun to see. "How about we go check out that light festival?" Helga agreed that it sounded good, so they took the subway to Central Park, where the festival was taking place. When they arrived, the park and its surrounding streets were teeming with couples and families. Helga's eyes lit up at the sights and sounds and smells, and Steve led her by the hand into the throngs of people. The park had been set up with rows and rows of market stalls, selling everything from lanterns to food and jewelry. The lake was awash with little boats, all lit up with paper lanterns and fairy lights. And lots of people had hired boats and rowed out to get a better look. Helga was in awe at all the activity and the beauty of the twinkling lights that adorned the market stalls. She stopped every now and then to inspect the goods that were on offer, and Steve followed casually. New York continued to amaze her. Having grown up in the mountains, she had never experienced anything like the wonder that was New York City, and it thrilled her every time she ventured into its streets. Her eye was drawn to a stall selling silver jewelry, and she stopped to take a look. All sorts of colorful lanterns hung around the stall's edges, reflecting like little fireworks in the silver bracelets and necklaces that were beautifully displayed on the counters. She pulled Steve over, and her eyes ran over the array of trinkets and jewelry. The stallholder stood to greet her. Noticing that she had a young man with her, he picked out a necklace and showed it to her. "Can I interest you in this piece?" He knew an eager customer when he saw one. "I think it would be perfect for you and your boyfriend." He held the necklace in the palm of his hand, and Helga could see that it was in two halves. One half was the figure of a man, and the other half was the figure of a woman. And the two halves were intertwined around each other, forming a figure-8 shape. Each one was adorned with 2 or 3 tiny gemstones. "It's beautiful," Helga said. "Infinity." She turned the pendant over in her hands and saw that the two figures could be separated. "Solid silver they are," the stallholder said. Helga loved the piece, and she recalled how she wanted to get Steve a special gift after he had given her Jonathan's little packet of money. "I'll take it." "Excellent choice, miss. That'll be $168. She paid the man, and he placed it carefully into a box and handed it to her. As they walked away from the stall, she took the necklace out of the box and held it up to Steve. "Let's put them on." But Steve was skeptical of the necklace's quality. "I don't wear jewelry. Anyway, I wear shirts with ties most of the time. There'd be no point." "But you could wear it on days like today when you're not in business clothing." Helga pointed to his open shirt. "It would look great." He frowned, still uncertain. "But it's from a market stall. But it's most likely a fake, made from some kind of chemical synthesis. It's not good for your skin. I'd probably get a rash from it. And who knows what those stones are?" He rubbed his chest as if the necklace was already resting there, and he could feel the effects of the artificial substance he believed it was made of. "You can wear it if you like, but I won't wear it, and I don't really think you should either." Helga stared at him, dumbfounded, and saw the deep disdain in his eyes. Her heart felt as if it had been ripped out of her body, and she felt an intense sense of loss. She silently put the necklace back in its box. Steve took her hand, but she couldn't bring herself to wrap her fingers around his, and she stared into the distance as they walked along the edge of the lake. Steve sensed that something was wrong. "If you'd really like us to have matching necklaces, I'll take you to a proper jeweler tomorrow, and I'll buy them." Helga smiled weakly and felt a little disappointed that he had misread the situation so badly. They continued walking in silence past one stall after another, but Helga had lost the desire to look at any of them. They reached a footbridge and came to a stop. Steve could tell that her mood had changed, and he faced her and took her hands in his. "What's wrong?" She wasn't sure why she felt so put out. She knew his justification for not wearing the necklace was probably right, but something in the way he had said it upset her. Or maybe it's just that I'm an ignorant country girl who knows nothing about anything, she thought despondently. She didn't answer his question, but he could see that she was still holding tightly to the box with the necklace. And without warning, a strange look came across his face, and he seemed to understand what was wrong. He gently took the box out of her hand and opened it up. There were only a few dim lights on the bridge, but the little stones still sparkled up at him. "Actually, I quite like it," he said, still focusing on the necklace. Helga tensed up, anticipating what was coming next. It probably is solid silver, but I can't tell what the stones are. Her gaze fell on the stones, but she didn't say anything. Steve let out an awkward cough. But it's such a small stone. I doubt it would do any harm, even if it is artificial. I'm sure I could wear it occasionally. Helga looked hopefully up at him as he removed the male half of the necklace and clasped it around his neck. Then, he took the female half and placed it around her neck, carefully holding her hair out of the way. As he did up the clasp, she felt his breath on her ear, and her body tingled. He turned her around to face him again, and he looked at the shining little stones. Are you still angry with me? She looked into his eyes, and she could see that they were filled with remorse. Her heart skipped a beat, and she was ready to forgive him. I'm not angry. He sighed with relief and took her into his arms. How about we go to the shopping mall tomorrow? I'll buy you whatever you like. But Helga shook her head vehemently. No, I don't want anything. He gazed into her eyes and tried to read what she was thinking. He swallowed, and his Adam's apple rolled gently up and down in his throat. You don't want anything? Absolutely nothing. Not even this? And with that, he leaned in toward her and kissed her. Only then did she realize what he had meant. She wanted to say, I'll have that. But his mouth was exploring hers, and it was impossible to speak. Steve and Helga kissed in the dapple light of the fireworks at the Festival of Lights until the sound of them caught up. When he let her go, they stood together at the end of the bridge and looked up at the sky. The fireworks kept coming, painting the black sky a multitude of colors, while lighting up the eyes of the spectators. Do you like it? He asked. Yes. Her eyes were dancing with the ever-changing light, but she remained the same Helga that he had always known. They stayed that way until she reached over and touched his arm. He turned to look at her. He noticed that her face had turned pink, and she looked nervous. I have something to say. Steve nodded, and then raised his eyebrows in question. Helga looked serious when she spoke. After this is over, I'd like for us to go to my mentor's grave. Is that okay? Steve was surprised, but he quickly realized that she wanted to introduce him to her family. He smiled. Are you that eager to marry me? Helga's heart fluttered, and she didn't know how to answer. She wanted to show a bit of decorum, but she didn't want to come across as too reserved. Steve, on the other hand, just wanted to show that he cared. So he put his arm around her shoulder and gazed back at the sky. Okay. Oliver, who was far away in Cuba, wasn't in the mood for fireworks or any celebrations. He still hadn't heard anything from Zoe. It was as if she had completely disappeared. He had considered that she might still be in Havana, but after an intense search, there was still no news. Gavin had also vanished and hadn't been to the Sloan family home since she had disappeared, which strengthened his belief that Gavin had kidnapped her. It had been almost a week, however, and there had been no attempt at negotiation or ransom. Oliver wasn't sure what he was waiting for. The night in Havana was very cold, and his clothes were thin. He shivered as he stood outside and looked at the vast sky. A thought suddenly crossed his mind. America. He wondered if the reason Gavin hadn't immediately contacted him was because he wanted to make a move in the States against Esther. Only Gavin and his sister had known that he liked Esther. Mackenzie was dead, and Gavin wanted to avenge what had happened. He realized that it was very likely that Gavin would want to use those closest to Oliver, and that he might take Esther in addition to Zoe. With that in mind, he hurriedly picked up his phone and called Esther. Xavier had been with his family in Havana. With Esther being pregnant, it hadn't been convenient for her to go too, so he had gone by himself. He had attended Jonathan's succession ceremony and then flown back to New York that morning. He arrived in the afternoon, and Esther said that she wanted to see what was happening in Times Square. Although he wasn't keen, she really wanted to go, so he compromised and arranged for bodyguards to accompany them. There were a lot of people, and he kept her close to his side as they walked along the bustling sidewalk. Esther had already gotten through the early stages of pregnancy, where nausea dictated what she could eat. Steve smirked, which made her feel even worse. Eat, and she was craving all the food being sold from the food carts along the way. She was happy to eat as she walked. She liked the look of a fancy barrette in the window of a store, and as she went to go inside, someone bumped into her. The person seemed to realize that she was pregnant and supported her around the waist. She didn't think any more of it. She went inside, made her purchase, and carried on. It wasn't long after that Oliver called her. All he heard was an emotionless voice saying, "The number you have dialed cannot be connected. Please try again later." His heart sank, and he called again. When he got the same message, the alarm bells started ringing even louder. He decided to try Xavier, but he heard the same thing. But before he could make another, his phone rang. Gavin's name popped up on the screen. Oliver didn't mess around. "What do you want, Gavin?" "Straight to business." Gavin laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "But I guess the way you treated my sister was equally brutal." "Tell me your conditions." "Before I make any, why don't I clarify the bargaining chips that I hold in my hand?" He pressed a button and played a recording. Esther's panicked voice could be heard. "Where is this place? Xavier, wake up! We've been kidnapped!" Gavin turned off the recording. "There's a photo, too. I've sent it to you." Oliver held the phone with white knuckles as he opened up the message. And it was current, because she was clearly well into her pregnancy. Oliver put the phone to his ear again. "Tell me what you want from me." "I actually don't want anything physical from you, although I have nothing left." Gavin smiled coldly and self-deprecatingly. "You took my sister's life, and I have no love left for anyone or anything. Everything is against me." A ruthlessness crept into his tone. "I'm unhappy, and I don't want you to be happy. I don't want your wealth. I just want you to have to choose." He enunciated very slowly as he continued. "I have a woman who is carrying your baby. I also have the woman you love the most who's pregnant with another man's offspring. All I need to know is, who do you choose?" Zoe, who was beside him, instantly turned pale when she heard what he said. Her mouth was sealed with tape, and she couldn't make a sound. Gavin saw the panic in her eyes, and the corners of his mouth curled up in a playful smile. He turned on the hands-free so that she could hear. "Who do you want to live out of the two women? I promise that the one you choose will be safe and sound. The other, naturally, will not." Oliver swayed slightly as he listened to what Gavin was saying on the other end of the phone. He had asked his people to investigate Esther's whereabouts in the States, but all he had been told was that Esther and Xavier had gone to Times Square. It would have been easy to dismiss Gavin's claims as false, but Oliver didn't dare to take that gamble. Gavin's voice came through the phone again. "Isn't it easy to make a decision? I thought you would choose Zoe without hesitation. She's carrying your flesh and blood, after all." As he spoke, he slowly leaned over and approached Zoe, laughing softly. "I'll give you 10 seconds. If you don't choose, then they'll all die." He began to count down. 10, 9, 8, 7. Oliver knew that he was facing the most difficult decision of his life. Esther's safety had always been of the utmost importance to him. He normally wouldn't hesitate to make a sacrifice to ensure her safety. The sacrifice at this point, though, would be of his own unborn children. Zoe had been missing for a while, and Gavin had a current picture of her. It was obvious that she was with him. It was also true that Oliver had killed Mackenzie and that Gavin was justified in his hatred of him. Esther couldn't be contacted, and Oliver couldn't be sure that Gavin had her. He couldn't tolerate the uncertainty or take the risk. On the other end of the phone, Gavin was still counting down. 6, 5, 4. Zoe was aware of Oliver's silence, and she paled even further with the discovery of who had gotten her pregnant. She was stunned that it was the high and mighty Oliver Williams. She had never seen his picture, so her understanding of him was limited to what she had heard from others. He had been described as young and promising, decisive, and an innovative leader. Everything she had heard had been positive. He was the type of man she never would have thought she would talk to, let alone be a surrogate for. She had had an uncomfortable pregnancy. She had only just stopped vomiting regularly. And she had, at times, fantasized about meeting the father, especially when the baby in her belly had moved for the first time. She would have liked to share that experience with the father. She had never met the man or known his identity, but she had thought there would be some sort of connection between them due to the life that they had created together. But as the silence from Oliver stretched out, her heart grew colder. Any hope she had was slowly fading into the abyss. Gavin kept counting. 3, 2, 1. As he got to 1, Oliver spoke in a rush. "Let Esther go." The last of the color drained from Zoe's face, and she started shaking. Because she was so scared, her stomach started contracting. She tried to cry out, but her mouth was sealed by the tape, and the sound was muffled. It was loud enough, though, for Oliver to hear her pain and despair. He was shaking just as much as she was, but he remained outwardly calm. "I need to see you release her immediately." Gavin sneered. "All right." He sighed at the proof that the supposedly dignified Oliver Williams was a slave to love. He had chosen to sacrifice his own child for a woman who was married to and pregnant with the children of another man. "Are you sure you want to save her? You know she's married to someone else, and she's having twins with him." Zoe felt a tearing sensation in her belly. The pain was increasing, and she covered her stomach with her hands while cold sweat dripped from her forehead. She was still as white as a ghost, and her eyes were filled with fear and despair. She heard Oliver speak again. "I expect you to keep your promise." Gavin responded with a quiet snigger. "Okay, I'll let go of your pet. But as you've given up on Zoe, she can be my plaything to do with as I wish. I think I've achieved my goal." He hung up the phone and dialed another number. Thousands of miles away, in New York City, someone walked quietly up behind Esther and discreetly removed the signal jammer from her body. At the same time, they took a picture of Esther and Xavier standing together and sent it to Gavin, who then sent it on to Oliver. As soon as he saw the picture, Oliver understood everything. Gavin hadn't had Esther at all. He had just banked on Oliver not wanting to risk her safety. Gavin had really only had Zoe, so Oliver knew that he had only called to make him suffer, and he didn't think that making the other choice would have saved Zoe and changed her fate. Oliver had never felt that there was a moment in his life where he wanted to kill someone so badly. He had essentially ended the lives of people that day with the choice he had made. But he knew that if he were faced with the same choice again, he would do the same thing. He pulled his hand through his hair as if to tear away all the bad thoughts, while his chest rose and fell with tumultuous emotion. He wasn't sure that he deserved a family if he could give them up so callously. Gavin had won that round. He had dealt a mighty blow to Oliver's self-worth and dignity. Oliver felt responsible for what had happened to the innocent Zoe and their child, and he knew that it would take a long time to get over. He waved one of his guards over. "If you ever see any of Gavin's men, kill them immediately." His guard was startled by the intense atmosphere that he had walked into. He nodded and quickly left. Oliver looked at the crescent-shaped moon, and his eyes filled with unshed tears. In the dark basement, Zoe clutched her stomach and was close to fainting from the pain and shock. Gavin noticed what was happening and pulled the tape off her face. "Are you going to die?" I beg you to save me, and save my baby." Her voice trembled, and she groped wildly at Gavin's clothes. "I can do anything you want me to do, if you just let us go." The viciousness in Gavin's eyes intensified. The father of your children doesn't want you anymore. What's the point of you living? I want my child to live and have a good life. Her tears fell one by one. I'm begging you. As Zoe was speaking, Gavin watched the bright red blood flowing from out between her legs. It was spreading very quickly over the ground. He frowned and spat 2 words back at her. Bad luck. He broke free of her desperately grasping hands and walked out. It was all turning into a bit of a farce. It had been so easy for him to capture Zoe and hold her hostage. He didn't want her to die so easily, but he thought that it was likely that she wouldn't hold out much longer if her bleeding wasn't treated. He thought about how he could stop it, because she was no use to him dead. The hospital wasn't an option, as he still didn't want anyone to know where she was. He wanted to keep Oliver's people in the dark as long as possible. There was an obstetrician nearby, so Gavin went to her for help. By that stage, the ground was covered with blood, and Zoe was unconscious. Esther and Xavier didn't know that anything had happened at all. They were occupied with taking pictures to showcase their day. They meandered around for a while, but Esther eventually grew tired and they retraced their steps. When they passed by another food cart, Esther tugged at Xavier's sleeve. I want more. I can eat what's left tomorrow morning. Although Xavier wasn't 100% sure the food was safe for a pregnant woman, he was swayed by the look on her face and agreed. Okay, I'll get you some. He went to buy what she wanted while she took a couple of selfies with him in the background. She was feeling relaxed and happy when her phone rang. She answered it quickly. It was Oliver, and his voice sounded thick with emotion. Esther? Hi, Oliver. You sound strange. Are you sick? No. He leaned against the wall as the cold wind once again penetrated his thin clothes. I want to ask you something. Esther could hear that something wasn't right, and she stopped smiling. Has something happened? No. Oliver looked at the moon again. He felt weak and was hoping to somehow draw some strength from it. What sort of man can't even protect his child and would sacrifice that child for someone else? Esther was shocked by the statement. She figured that he was talking about himself, but she couldn't see how the situation he described matched him. Only one question sprang to his mind. Who did this man sacrifice his child for? For the person he loves. Esther frowned slightly as she thought. I don't know what a man's perspective is, but being pregnant, I know that my children are very important. Maybe it's the maternal bond, but I can't imagine a person sacrificing their baby for anything. After she finished speaking, she heard heavy breathing through the phone, as though he were battling a pain of some sort. Esther's heart sank. Who are you talking about? He didn't answer. Esther continued. I can only answer from my personal point of view. If what actually happened was more complicated than what you described, that person's choice may not have been wrong. Maybe he had his own difficulties, or maybe he had no other choice. Yeah, you're right. Esther was still a little worried, but she knew Oliver's temperament. She knew that she wouldn't be able to find out anything that he didn't want to tell her. Sensing his mood, she changed the topic. How are things in Havana? A lot is going on here. We're in Times Square. I've been eating my fill from the food carts, so I might have put on more than the baby weight. As Oliver listened to Esther talk, he swallowed heavily and started to cry quietly. He didn't move as he focused on the sound of her voice. Unfortunately, I'm pregnant, or we would have been in Cuba too. My dad left the company to the trustees to manage so that he could relax and enjoy some time off in New York. Once my mommy duty's done, I'll take the company over. I've invested half of my shares from Unique Perfumes, and I'm about to becoming a domineering CEO. Esther laughed. Xavier had made his purchase and at that point was back by her side. Because she was on the phone, He guided her to a nearby seat and waited for her to finish. "Do you want to invest in our company and receive a share of the year-end dividends?" Esther asked Oliver. She was already imagining the future. "Although our company is probably too small, right?" Oliver tried hard to calm his emotions so that he could speak. "Not at all." "It's a deal then. You can be the third shareholder." She looked at the food in Xavier's hand and wanted to eat again. "I'm done with this food. I'll have to wait until after the birth to lose weight. I can't resist, even though I already look like a bowling ball." Oliver sought to reassure her. "It doesn't matter if you're a bit fat, as long as you and the babies are healthy." "That's true, but I hope the twins won't be too big when the time comes to give birth, and then it won't be too difficult." She suddenly thought of something. "I haven't given them names yet. We have 2 boys on the way. So if you have any inspiration, let me know. You are their uncle, after all." Oliver's grip suddenly tightened around his phone. He thought of the child in Zoe's womb that had had no chance of being born. He felt his heart being torn apart. He took a deep breath so that he could answer. "Okay." "Then it's settled," Esther said. "When your 2 nephews come out, I'll send you a photo." "No need. I'll come and see you guys." "Really?" Esther felt excited. "But you're not allowed to laugh at the size of me." She continued to chatter for a while before saying goodbye. "Was that Oliver?" Xavier asked. Esther nodded. "He doesn't sound so good, so we talked for a bit." She thought about Oliver being alone in Cuba. His only brother had passed away, and his father was no longer around. He also didn't date, so he really was all alone. She sighed. "I don't know when he'll find a girlfriend. I'm sure he's quite lonely by himself." "I talked to him in Havana a few days ago. He doesn't have any plans to find a girlfriend at the moment. Maybe he's got other ideas." "Yeah." She nodded and stopped guessing. The next day, Nancy and Esther went shopping. When they returned home, Nancy took out her purchases like the spoils of war and started to distribute them to everyone. Finally, she smiled as she gave a dress to Katie. "This is for you." The dress was long and blue, and the style was simple but generous. It could be worn for any occasion. Katie was thrilled and took it happily. "Thank you, Auntie Maria." Nancy smiled and followed her upstairs. "I'm going to sleep for a while." She and Jonathan had been in the Davis mansion with the rest of the family for the past few days. She went to the guest room on the 2nd floor and lay on the bed for a while, but the sleepiness she had been feeling deserted her. She got up and went to Katie's room. Katie was doing her homework and looked engrossed. She was about to leave when Katie noticed her and invited her in. "I have a question that I don't know how to answer. Can you come take a look?" Nancy smiled. "I might not know. Maybe I've forgotten." She read the question and found she could answer it because it was basic mathematics. She talked Katie through the problem, who wrote down the formula and nodded sagely. Nancy sighed. "It's great to see that you're so persistent and hardworking. You might even get the top score in the college entrance exam." Katie smiled in response. "I'm sure it won't be easy." She wrote down the answer and they chatted about college. "Can I borrow your phone?" Katie asked with feigned nonchalance. Nancy nodded and handed it over. Katie had searched earlier that day for Emma's social media handles, but she hadn't been able to find anything. She used Nancy's phone to find the information and quickly noted it down. She hesitated only for a moment before clicking to see a post that Emma had made where she had also pinned her location. There was only a short sentence. "My only wish is for my family to be healthy and for things to go smoothly." The accompanying map below indicated that she was in a hospital in Boston. Katie's spirits lifted, and she quickly logged out and returned the phone to Nancy. "I'm going to the bathroom." Nancy nodded and left her to it. In the bathroom, Katie found that she was trembling slightly as she held her own phone. She quickly searched for the account that she had found and sent a friend request. She waited. but 10 minutes passed without a reply or notification. She typed in Emma's phone number and debated whether to call and let her know that she had sent her a friend request. Just as she was about to press the call button, a notification popped up. She opened it to see that Emma had accepted her friend request. She typed her a message. "Hi, Emma. This is Katie." Emma didn't reply. Katie could think of nothing else, and she decided to call her. Emma answered very quickly, and her voice was somewhat hoarse. "Is there something you want to talk to me about?" Katie had originally had a lot of questions that she wanted to ask, but at that moment, with her heart beating fast, her mind was blank. She didn't know what to say at all. Emma didn't have much time or patience. "Are you there?" Yes. Katie was about to say more when she heard another female voice on the phone. "Who is the patient's family?" Emma said, "Me," before everything went quiet. Katie looked at her phone and saw that Emma had ended the call. Katie went back to Emma's social media account and realized that the post wishing her family to be healthy had been made that morning. She was sure that she had just heard a doctor's voice and wondered if Emma was still in the hospital. Katie knew it really wasn't her business and that she wouldn't be much use at the hospital, but she changed her clothes for a trip regardless. Emma's family was in Boston. It was about 200 miles away from New York, which all of a sudden didn't seem that far. Her family noticed that she looked ready to go somewhere, and they asked her where she was headed. She quickly came up with an excuse. "I'm meeting a friend for a walk, and maybe dinner." She just wanted to see Emma, if nothing else. "Would you like a lift somewhere?" Carol asked. Katie smiled. "You could take me to the subway. We're meeting there." Once there, she jumped out of the car and went straight to the ticket desk. She bought a ticket for the fastest train to Boston and climbed aboard. It was the first time that she had traveled alone. Although she was of average adult height, she was still a teenage girl. It would have been a lie to say that she wasn't nervous. As the train left New York City, her heart was filled with excitement. She was going to see Emma again. She knew that she wouldn't be able to change anything, but that wasn't her intention. She wanted to say goodbye to the first love of her life and get closure over her secret crush. She didn't need Emma to see her. She only needed to look at her from afar and then bury her deep in her memory. A few hours later, she was there. She took a taxi to Emma's pinned location. The weather was very cold, and the ground was covered with snow. Katie tightened her clothes, rubbed her frozen hands together, and went straight to the inpatient department. Once inside, she realized she didn't know which floor Emma was on. The main inpatient ward were on the 7th floor, so that was where she started her search. She figured that if she searched long enough, she would eventually find her. Katie practically ran from one room to another, but couldn't find her. She was feeling miserable when she suddenly thought of the operating theater. It was in the adjacent building. Just as she stepped onto the snow to make her way across, she saw a familiar figure. Emma was alone and leaving the clinic in a daze. She stepped into the falling snow, squatted down, and stayed like that. The heavy snow settled on her, and she didn't seem to notice. She stayed motionless, and she seemed sunken, as if her soul had been sucked from her body. Katie felt her heart constrict when she saw Emma in the snow, only 20 or so yards away. She really wanted to go over, but reason held her back, and she thought about leaving until someone else ran out from within the hospital. It was a young woman who was probably about the same age as Emma. She passed by Emma and almost didn't notice her. She went back to stand in front of her. Even through the snow, Katie recognized the woman as the one who appeared on Emma's social media updates. The girl stretched out her hand, seemingly wanting to pull Emma up, but Emma pushed her away. She clearly hadn't expected that as she staggered backward to avoid falling. She seemed to be angry as well because she started shouting at Emma. "I know you're sad, but you caused this, you know." Emma slowly raised her head. Even from a distance, Katie could see the fury in her eyes. Emma stood up. She was half a head taller than the other woman and looked down at her without saying a word. The other woman seemed a little afraid, but still spoke boldly. "We've been set to get married since we were young. I know I'm not as good as you because I didn't get into a fancy university in New York, so I'm stuck here. You've made a meteoric rise, and you don't need me anymore." Emma remained silent. "Your father is sick. The only suitable kidney is my father's, and he's willing to donate it as long as we get married as soon as possible." She looked aggrieved. "It's a kidney we're talking about. My father will be affected as well." Emma's hands clenched into fists, and her chest heaved, but she still remained silent. "You were the one who kept postponing the wedding day. We grew up together, and I can't believe you would rather delay your father's surgery than marry me. It's too late for your father now, and it's horrible that you've treated me like this." Tears were pouring down the woman's face by that stage. "Tell me, are you going to break up with me for good? Everyone in our town received invitations to our wedding. How am I going to face anyone again?" Her voice had grown even louder in her agitation, so Katie heard every word despite the distance between them. She was shocked. She didn't realize that there was such a story behind Emma's engagement. The air was bitterly cold. Katie felt that her frozen heart had started to warm up again, bit by bit. Emma finally spoke, albeit faintly. "I won't marry you because I've never loved you. I made you the promise because my father needed it. It's too late now, so the contract between us is over." "How can you do this to me? My parents planned all of this. I didn't do anything. Why are you hurting me?" "If I force myself to marry you, it would cause you more harm." Emma turned to leave, but the woman grabbed her tightly from behind. "You'll be sorry. I don't want to break up with you." Just as Emma was about to break free, another figure suddenly appeared in front of her. A loud slap sounded, and finger marks appeared on Emma's face. It swelled almost instantly. A woman in her 40s with red, teary eyes was standing in front of Emma. "You're not worthy of your father!" Another loud slap was heard. Emma had one foot in the air and was about to rush over to help when a sudden movement from Emma made her stop in her tracks. She had fallen to her knees toward her mom, Dorothy, the woman who had just slapped her. "Mom, I'm sorry. It's all my fault." Emma lowered her head. "It was me who killed Dad." Dorothy trembled visibly, and the third slap missed its mark because of how suddenly Emma had dropped. "If you had come back to marry Maya when you said, your dad would have had the surgery." Dorothy cried more angry tears as she loomed over her daughter. "You said he could still wait until you found another option, but what happened in the end?" Emma was silent. She had nothing to say to make it better. She had been in contact with a different source for a kidney, and the operation had been planned for that day. What she hadn't expected was that the woman she had been in contact with would suddenly go back on her word. She had been completely unprepared for that outcome. Her father had always said that he was fine. In the video he had sent her, he had even told her not to come back early. He had also said that he didn't like Maya and that Emma shouldn't agree to marry her. He hadn't expected things to go as they had either. Emma knew that what was done and that it was all her fault. Dorothy fell into the snow in front of her daughter. "He was your dad. Do you know how much he loved you? You liked toys as a child, and he was a carpenter. He used his tools to make more for you. You liked cars. He didn't have a car, so he learned about them for you. How can you do this? You're a beast." Tears ran down Emma's cheeks, but she didn't say anything. The finger marks on her fair cheeks were an angry red. "So, about the marriage between Emma and me," Maya whispered to test the waters. "Maya, our family clearly is going through a hard time. It's best to leave us alone." Dorothy didn't even look at her as she answered. "But Emma and I have sent out invitations. Everyone knows that I am to be her wife." Emma looked up impatiently. "I won't marry you. Just leave." I don't want to see you anymore." Maya angrily stomped off. Emma noticed that her mother was also on the ground in the snow. "I'll help you up, Mom." Dorothy pushed her away and eyed her with hatred. "Don't call me Mom. I can't have a daughter so lacking in loyalty." "Mom, Emma wanted to say more, but her mom refused to listen. "Just go. I know about the woman you met at the city. I can see where your priorities lie." Dorothy then stood up, turned around, and walked into the building. Emma wanted to follow her, but in the end, she didn't. She was aware that if she had married Maya and her father had had the surgery, everything would have worked out. She hadn't wanted to marry someone she didn't like, so she had found another kidney donor. She hadn't expected the donor to go back on her word and for the kidney to have gone to someone else. She had immediately asked Eduardo to hack into the hospital networks to find another kidney. But because her father's blood type was rare, it had all been too late. The internet hadn't provided a solution, so her only choice had been to return and get married as originally planned. What she hadn't expected was for them to be unable to make a surgical appointment for her father, or for her father's situation to change so quickly. It had all been too late. Emma stayed, kneeling alone in the snow. She felt like her world was falling apart and that there was only darkness. Katie took one look at Emma's shivering body and then ran into the first cafe she could find to get her a cup of piping hot tea. Emma was still crouching in the snow in front of the hospital entrance when she returned. She was so pale from the cold that she was almost as white as the snow. At that moment, Katie felt a love and compassion she had never felt before. She approached Emma and held the cup of tea out for her. "Drink this. It'll warm you up." Emma broke out of her daze and looked up at Katie. Katie put the hot cup of tea in her hand. "What are you doing outside in this cold weather? You don't even have a warm coat on." Emma's eyes were red. "Katie, what are you doing here? Have you been here the whole time?" Katie hesitated for a moment, afraid to admit that she had seen everything. She didn't want Emma to feel embarrassed. "No, I just arrived." After taking a few sips of tea, the color returned to Emma's face. She looked at Katie coldly. "You don't have to wait around for me. If you're here to see someone in the hospital, you can go." It was the first time she had spoken to Katie like that. It was painfully clear that she was suffering. Katie looked up at the snowflakes falling from the sky. "You're gonna freeze to death if you stay outside much longer." Emma ignored her and looked in the direction of the hospital entrance. Her father had passed away earlier, and she knew her mother had already called the funeral home. Though she was aware her mother was upset with her, she wanted to go back inside and say goodbye to her father one last time before they took him away. When she saw the funeral home's minivan pull up in front of the building, she rushed inside. Upstairs, her mother was already making arrangements for her husband to be cremated. Emma stood silently by the door, afraid to go in and make her even angrier. She followed behind her mother and the men from the funeral home as they carried her father's body down to the minivan. She then watched the men place it inside the vehicle and drive away. She was about to get into her mother's car when Dorothy shook her finger at her. "Don't you dare! I don't want to see you right now. You've caused us nothing but grief and suffering." Emma stood rooted to the spot, watching her silently as she got into her car and drove away. She shivered as snowflakes landed on her hair and face and melted. Katie carefully approached her. "Are you okay?" Emma pretended not to hear her. "I know you're devastated, but you need to get out of the cold before you get sick. Your father wouldn't want that." Emma suddenly whipped around with an angry expression. Katie removed her scarf and wrapped it around Emma's neck. "Here, this will keep you warm." "Why are you here?" Emma demanded again. Katie looked at the ground, embarrassed. "I don't know. I guess I wanted to see you." "Just leave me alone. You heard what my mom said. I'm nothing but trouble." Katie met her gaze and could see the pain in her eyes. She put her hand on Emma's arm. Don't say that. Come on, let's go get something to eat and warm up. I'm freezing. Katie pushed her hand away. You saw what happened. I'm dealing with a lot right now and don't have time for you. Just go away and leave me alone. Katie pursed her lips. Seeing how upset Emma was, she was afraid something might happen to her, so she decided to follow her. Emma trudged home through the snow, thinking about her father. She was sad, but also angry at him for leaving her. It was a long walk from the hospital to her house, but she didn't care. Katie walked a few steps behind her, her heart overflowing with love. They arrived at Emma's place an hour later. Just as Emma entered the gate, a group of women rushed out of the house and started hurling insults at her. Look who's here, a middle-aged woman exclaimed sarcastically. It's the no-good daughter of Dorothy's. How dare you show your face here after what you did? Your father died because of you. Why did you break off your engagement to Maya? Was she not good enough for you? Don't you care about your father? Maya's a wonderful girl. You wouldn't find another like her. You broke the poor girl's heart. She must have found someone else in New York. Why else would she break up with Maya? She should never have gone there in the first place. Everyone spoke at once, bombarding Emma with questions and accusations. Katie stood a few yards away from the fence, not daring to take another step. The middle-aged woman suddenly noticed her and rushed toward her. Katie became frightened and wanted to run away, but the heavy snow on the ground made it difficult to get very far. The woman grabbed her arm and dragged her to the front yard. She looked angrily at Emma. Is this the girl you dumped Maya for? She looks very young. She can't be more than a teenager. Katie looked down at her hands, and she turned red with embarrassment. Katie wanted to explain who she was, but the woman wouldn't let her get a word in edgewise. Just then, Maya and her mother, Yasmin, walked out the front door of the house. Yasmin pointed at Katie. Is she the troublemaker? She looks like a kid. How dare she steal Emma away from my Maya? She grabbed her arm. Katie closed her eyes, waiting for her to slap her across the face. Just then, she heard Emma's voice. That's enough. Katie opened her eyes and saw that Emma had grabbed hold of Yasmin's wrist and was glaring at her. I never wanted to marry Maya and told her that we wouldn't be happy if we got married just because my father needed a kidney. My father isn't around anymore, and you can't force me to marry her. So she grabbed Katie's arm and pulled her away from Yasmin. Don't interfere in my life and leave Katie alone. She's not my girlfriend. She's my friend's niece. Shame on you for picking on a young, innocent girl. There was a stunned silence for a moment, but then the middle-aged woman spoke up. How do we know you're telling the truth? All kinds of disgusting things happened in New York. I wouldn't be surprised if you're dating someone underage. The redhead next to her nodded. That's right. You've changed so much since you left Boston, Emma. You don't even care about your family anymore. Yasmin glared at Emma. Are you telling me there's nothing between you and this little tramp? What's she doing here then? The group began to hurl accusations at them again, though Katie had never felt so humiliated, and though she wished she hadn't caused trouble for Emma, she was secretly pleased to discover that Emma had never been engaged. She was hurt by the insults that the women were throwing at them, but she knew that Emma was in a lot more pain than she was. Emma ignored the nosy women and dragged Katie away from the front yard and onto the street. You need to go. Don't come back again, okay? Katie stared at her in astonishment. And what are you going to do? Emma didn't know what to tell her. She was sure her mother would kick her out of the house and that her neighbors wouldn't take her in. There was a chill in the air. She looked up at the sky and the snow-covered trees, thinking what a terrible start to the new year it had been. Everyone she knew was looking forward to new beginnings, but she could only think of the past. Her eyes filled with tears, and she averted Katie's gaze. Emma, why don't you go inside and grab a warm coat? Then we'll get out of here. I can't. I have to stay here. You should go back to New York. Katie nodded, but she was reluctant to leave. Okay. She hailed a cab that was passing by. The driver stopped, rolled down his window, and smiled suggestively at her. Hey, little girl, where are you headed? Jump in and I'll give you a ride. Katie was disgusted, and she took a few steps back. What's wrong? The driver asked. Don't be afraid. I'm a decent person. Emma ran up to the car. Get out of here, you jerk. She doesn't want a ride from you. The cab driver stepped on the gas pedal and drove away. Emma sighed as she looked at Katie. Who accompanied you to Boston? I can take you back to your hotel. No one. I'm alone. Emma was shocked. You mean you traveled all this way on your own? Katie lowered her head, ashamed. Did you follow me here after we spoke on the phone? Katie nodded, afraid to tell her how much she loved her and that she had been worried about her. She couldn't tell her that she had gone through all her social media posts and had seen that she was at the hospital. She also couldn't tell her that she had fallen for her when she had heard her speech so long ago. She remained silent, like a dog that had been scolded. Emma didn't say anything else. She took her phone out of her pocket and ordered a private car for Katie, which arrived moments later. Emma opened the door for her, and then she got in on the other side. It was then that she realized she was still holding the cup of tea Katie had given her. They sat in awkward silence as the car took them to the train station. Emma glanced at Katie, wondering why she had traveled from New York to see her. But her thoughts soon drifted back to her father, and she stared gloomily out of the window. Katie desperately wanted to explain to her why she was there, but all her reasons sounded lame, and she didn't want to burden Emma with her feelings. She knew Emma was preoccupied with her father's death, and she didn't want to appear insensitive. Katie wished Emma would let her stay for the funeral so she could comfort her. She was worried that her mother's anger and the breakup with Maya would be too much for her to bear alone. She also wished she was older and more experienced, so Emma would take her seriously. She stared at the cup of tea in Emma's hand, thinking it was the only thing she could offer her. Much to her dismay, the trip was shorter than she anticipated, and the car soon pulled up at the train station. Katie hung her head. I'm so sorry, Emma. I never meant to cause trouble. Emma leaned back against the car seat, exhausted. It's okay. It's not your fault. You don't need to apologize. She looked out the window again, wondering where she was going to go. It was snowing heavily, and she could see children throwing snowballs outside the station. They wore colorful hats and mitts, and they seemed so carefree and happy. She turned to Katie, who looked at her hopefully. Don't ever come back again, Emma said coldly. Katie turned pale when she heard Emma's words. Emma was smart. She was sure Emma had guessed that the reason she had gone to Boston was because she was in love with her. But her message was loud and clear. She wasn't interested in her, and she wanted her to leave her alone. Katie felt as if someone had ripped her heart out of her chest. She looked away, trying not to show how upset she was. I'm still young, she told herself. I have my whole life ahead of me. Maybe I just need to wait until I'm a bit older. If I'm lucky, Emma will still be single. She opened the car door, and then she turned to Emma. Thanks for bringing me to the station. Take care. Emma nodded imperceptibly and waved her away. Katie bit her lip and walked into the station. She went to the ticket counter and waited in line. The woman behind the counter shook her head sympathetically when Katie told her that she wanted to travel to New York. I'm sorry, but there are no seats left on the train this afternoon. The earliest train you can take leaves tomorrow morning at 10:30. Would you like to buy a ticket? Katie was surprised. Are you sure? What about first class? I'm afraid not. We have no seats left in any of the carriages. Okay, I guess I'll take the train tomorrow then. She paid for her ticket, and then she left the station. She stood outside and looked around, wondering where to go. She had never stayed in a hotel by herself before, and her family thought she was in New York with a friend. She hugged herself tightly. It was freezing cold outside, and a strong wind was blowing. She trudged through the thick snow, feeling confused and lonely. She didn't notice someone walking behind her until she suddenly felt a hand grab her arm. She swung around with surprise and found herself face to face with Emma. "What are you doing out here? I thought you were going home." Katie shrugged. "I couldn't get a ticket for today." "So, where are you planning on going just now?" "I don't know. My train only leaves tomorrow morning. Don't worry about me. I'll stay in a hotel." She didn't want to trouble Emma since she had enough problems to deal with. Emma made no move to leave, so Katie forced a smile. "I'll be fine, I promise. Go home and get some rest. You've had a terrible day." But Emma started walking toward the hotel across the street, so Katie followed her without saying a word. Once they were in the hotel, Katie put her hand on Emma's arm. "Thanks. I'll take it from here." She went over to the reception area and then took out her ID and some cash. The man behind the desk frowned. "Do you have a guardian?" Emma appeared and showed him her driver's license and her credit card. "She's with me. I'd like 2 rooms, please." The man nodded. "Okay, let me just swipe your credit card." Katie looked at Emma in astonishment. Emma shrugged. "I can't stay at my house. My mother hates me, and all those nosy women are there offering their condolences. I can't stand it. I'll go home tomorrow once things have calmed down a bit." She suddenly thought of her father and the sad look in his eyes the last time she had seen him. She had willed herself not to cry in front of Katie. The receptionist handed them their card keys. "You have 2 adjoining rooms on the 3rd floor. Breakfast is from 6 to 9:30 a.m. on the ground floor." Emma thanked him, and she and Katie walked to the elevator. They got in and went up to the 3rd floor without saying a word to one another. They then walked along the corridor and found their rooms. "Emma, don't listen to your mother," Katie blurted out. "She shouldn't have said those things to you." Emma was surprised by her statement, and she suddenly realized Katie must have overheard their conversation at the hospital. "I know. I'm trying not to let it get to me. Well, good night." She opened the door to her room and went in. Katie watched the door slam and then went into her own room. She ordered some room service and then took out her phone, wondering what to tell her family about her whereabouts. "I can tell them I'm spending the night at my friend's house, or that I got stuck somewhere, but they'll know I'm lying," she thought. She scrolled through her contact list and suddenly saw Maria's name. She realized that her aunt was the only one who could get her out of the mess she was in. After taking a deep breath, she called her. Nancy picked up after a few rings. "Katie, what a surprise. Is everything okay?" "Where are you?" "I'm at home with your uncle. Why? Is something the matter? Do you want to come over?" Katie hesitated for a moment before answering. "Can you help me with something?" "Of course. What is it?" "I'm in Boston." She then told her everything, thinking her aunt would understand since she and Emma were such close friends and they worked together. "So you see, I went after her. I knew she was at a hospital in Boston because she posted on her account, and I took the first available train." Nancy was shocked at first, but then she realized why Katie had been acting so strange lately. "I tried to get a train back to New York tonight, but there weren't any tickets left," Katie continued. "The earliest I can leave is tomorrow morning. My family is going to freak out if they find out I'm here. So I'm hoping you can tell them I'm spending the night at your place. They'll believe you." "And where's Emma? She's not with you, is she?" Katie blushed. "She found me standing outside the train station, so she brought me to the hotel across the street. She's also staying here, but we're in 2 separate rooms." "Good. Katie, I know how you must feel, but you're much too young. Do you understand what I'm saying?" "Yes." "Listen, don't worry about a thing. I'm going to ask your uncle to come get you. We'll continue this conversation later." Katie tried to convince Nancy to let her spend the night in the hotel, but her aunt wouldn't hear of it. She insisted that Katie give her the hotel's address so Jonathan could pick her up. Nancy promised that she would call her parents and tell them she was staying at their place, so Katie felt relieved. After speaking to her aunt, she heard a knock at the door. She opened it to see that her food had arrived. Coincidentally, Emma had also ordered room service. When she saw Katie, she invited her to her room. "I need to talk to you. Why don't you come and eat with me?" Katie's heart sank. She had already guessed what Emma wanted to say to her. The hotel attendant wheeled the cart into Emma's room, and he placed their trays on the table. After he left, Katie dug into her food. "I'm starving. It's been a long day." She noticed Emma was picking at her food. "What's wrong? Don't you like what you ordered?" Emma shrugged. "I'm not that hungry, to tell you the truth. I don't know why I even bothered to get room service." Katie quickly polished off the food on her tray, and she sat back in her chair. Emma watched her silently, thinking back to that afternoon when Katie had brought her a cup of tea while she had crouched on the snow-covered ground in front of the hospital, full of despair and feeling guilty. Katie had been the only bright spot in the day, but she was just a teenager. She gazed steadily at her. "Katie, you're a smart girl, so you know you'll understand what I'm about to tell you." Katie nodded and swallowed the lump in her throat, afraid of what was coming. "You need to stop chasing me," Emma said in a low voice. "Nancy's a very close friend of mine, and you're her niece. What you're doing isn't appropriate. I'm much older than you." Katie lowered her head, pretending to pick lint off her sweater. "Do you understand?" Emma asked. Katie raised her head and met Emma's steady gaze. She wanted to answer her, but no words came out. She fought back tears, not wanting to show Emma how much she was hurting at that moment. She was proud and dignified and didn't want Emma to think otherwise. She was afraid that if she opened her mouth, she would burst into tears, so she simply nodded. Then she stood up, threw the garbage from her tray in the wastebasket, and quietly left. The moment the door to Emma's room closed behind her, she started crying uncontrollably. She felt in her pocket for her keycard, but she discovered it wasn't there. Just then, the door to Emma's room opened, and Emma popped her head out. She was holding the keycard. "Here, you left this on the table." Katie could barely see anything through her tears. She hung her head, took the keycard from Emma without looking at her, and quickly went into her room. Emma sighed and closed her door. She stared at the tray of food on the table for a moment before picking it up and throwing everything into the wastebasket. She then lay on her bed, exhausted. She knew Katie was upset, but she had done the right thing. She wondered whether she would think of Katie longingly in a few years. For the moment, she was nothing but a young teenager. Katie squatted on the floor in her room, her face buried in her hands. She was sure Emma had seen her tear-stained face in the corridor. All her efforts to stay calm and collected in Emma's room earlier had been useless. Her pride and self-esteem had crumbled the moment she had walked out of the door, and Emma had seen it. She must think I'm pitiful and weak. To make matters worse, Emma had made it clear that she considered her nothing more than Nancy's niece. She was no one to her, not even a friend. She sat on the ground without moving for a long time. She then wiped away her tears and went into the bathroom. Her eyes were red, so she washed her face with cold water. She didn't want her uncle to see her like that when he arrived. After putting a bit of makeup on, Katie sat on her bed and watched television for a while. At 9 o'clock in the evening, she heard a knock. She opened the door to see Jonathan standing there. She threw her arms around his neck. "I'm so glad to see you. Just let me grab my things." He nodded and waited for her to get her handbag and put her coat on. They then took the elevator down to the lobby. Jonathan was silent for a while as they drove out of the hotel parking lot. He then glanced at Katie. "Did you say goodbye to Emma?" She nodded. Jonathan could tell she had been crying. She didn't need to say anything for him to know what had happened. He stared out the windshield at the falling snow. "Katie, I know what it's like to be your age. No matter how much you want something, you may not get it. Life can be cruel sometimes. You have to learn to live with it." "I know." "That goes for everything in life, not just relationships. Sometimes you work hard for something, and you end up failing nonetheless. I know you're feeling sad at the moment, but you're not alone. These things happen to everyone. You need to learn to let go and think about the future. Emma's too old for you. Katie felt embarrassed. The last thing she wanted was for her uncle to lecture her. You're still a teenager, Jonathan continued, and Emma's an adult. There's a huge age gap. You have so many things to experience before you're ready for a proper relationship. Katie stared out the window. There was so much she wanted to say, but she couldn't. Her uncle patted her on the shoulder. Just be patient. You have so many wonderful things to look forward to. Forget about what happened and focus on the things that make you happy. Jonathan smiled at Katie. Everyone loves you so much. You know you're the princess in the family, right? Katie pouted. No, I'm not. You're so young. You can be anything you want to be. In a few years, you'll have finished university, and the world will be your oyster. Katie hoped that by then Emma would have noticed her as more than just Nancy's niece. Her uncle seemed to be reading her mind. If Emma didn't return your feelings, it's only because of your age difference. But in 10 years, you'll be in your prime, and the age gap won't seem that big. What if she's happily married by then? That's possible, but then you'll just have to accept it. No one waits around forever. Besides, who knows if she's the one? It may seem like the end of the world right now, but I'm sure there'll be a wonderful person waiting for you when you're ready. You need to focus on your studies now. Later, when you have a career and you know who you are, the right person will come along. Katie could feel her heart pounding in her chest. Her uncle was right. She had everything to look forward to, and suddenly, the world didn't seem like such a bad place after all. Do you know why some people can face challenges head-on and still smile? Jonathan asked. Because they know that life is unpredictable and that everything is always changing. The way you feel now won't last. She nodded slowly. Everything he said made sense. She was finally beginning to see the light at the end of the tunnel. She vowed to focus on school and her talents so she could become a better person. I get it. I promise to work hard and not get distracted by things. However, she knew she wouldn't get over her crush for a long time, even though Emma had rejected her. She would have to be patient and see what the future held in store. If Emma got married by the time she grew up, she would just have to learn to live with it. She looked out the window. They were on the highway and it was dark. She could just make out the snow-covered fields that surrounded them. It was late by the time they arrived at Jonathan's house. Nancy was already asleep, but Jacob was in the living room watching a legal series on TV. When he saw Jonathan and Katie, he got up. Are you hungry? There are some leftovers in the kitchen. Jonathan nodded. Yes. Katie, grab something to eat and then go upstairs. It's late. You'll find a pair of pajamas on the bed in the guest room. He then turned to Jacob. I didn't know you watched legal programs. Jacob shrugged. I've recently become interested in law, thinking of taking some classes at college. Jonathan patted his shoulder. Good for you. It may come in handy someday. How's it going with the things I asked you to do? Everything's ready. I even learned how to put makeup on. Jonathan raised his eyebrows. Makeup? Why? It'll make me look older. Don't you think I look too young? Jonathan laughed. Why hurry to become an adult? Who do you want to impress? Jacob turned red with embarrassment. No one. Come on, keep me company in the kitchen while I have supper. Katie couldn't fall asleep. She kept tossing and turning, seeing the image of Emma huddled in the snow before her. Her thoughts then turned to the scene in her hotel bedroom when Emma had told her to stop chasing her. She remembered what her uncle had said in the car, and something occurred to her. She sat up, turned on the bedside lamp, and grabbed her phone. She checked Emma's social media profile and discovered that she had deleted the photos of her and Maya. She quickly typed a message. Emma, I'm sorry about everything. I promise not to bother you again." She hesitated, and then she deleted the message. There was nothing left to say. She had already apologized, and Emma had made it clear that she was nothing more to her than her friend's niece. She checked another messaging app, and she was surprised to see that the messages she and Emma had exchanged were gone. Afraid that Emma had blocked her, she checked a third app, and she was relieved to find that they were still friends. Katie sat thinking for a long time before she finally decided to unfriend her. A message popped up asking her if she was sure, and she clicked on the confirm button. Finally, she deleted Emma from her contact list. The next morning, after having breakfast with Jonathan and Nancy, Katie went home. Her school holiday was only a few weeks away, but she had many things to do before then. She buried herself in schoolwork, and she spent her free time playing the piano, taking dance lessons, and going to the library and the mall with her classmates. The weeks flew by, and the school break arrived before she knew it. Nancy, Jonathan, and Jacob traveled to Houston during the break. After unpacking in their hotel room, they headed downtown to see the Lunar New Year Lantern Festival. It was the first time Nancy had been to the festival since her rebirth, which was several years ago already. They had a wonderful time, and Jonathan took many photos of her and her brother. They had dinner late and then returned to the hotel to get ready for the following day. In the morning, Jacob and Jonathan put on their best suits, and Jacob applied a bit of makeup. Nancy was impressed, thinking her brother looked about 10 years older. After picking up Jacob's DNA test, they went to the Franklin Group offices. After Stark Green had died, the major shareholders of the Franklin Group had appointed a management team to handle the business's day-to-day operations. The company had a good foothold in the industry and performed well. The company's major shareholders had received a meeting invitation from the acting CEO, instructing them to make themselves available to meet with the company's main shareholder. The Johnson family controlled the highest number of shares in the company. Edward, Lily, and Nancy had passed away, leaving Jacob as the sole surviving Johnson and heir to the business. According to the shareholders, Jacob's situation was complicated. The trauma of losing his parents had left him mute. He had also disappeared shortly after that, and no one had heard from him for a long time. It seemed odd that he had reappeared, and they were curious about the meeting. They wondered if an imposter was trying to take Jacob's place, and some even suspected that the purpose of the meeting might be a plot to oust them. In addition, Jacob wasn't even 18 years old yet. Everyone arrived on time for the meeting, hoping someone knew what it was all about. To their disappointment, they realized nobody knew, and they patiently waited for the meeting to begin. At the appointed time, the door opened, and the acting CEO entered with two people at his side. Everyone immediately fell silent and looked at them. Jonathan was wearing a smart suit. He seemed to dominate the room from the moment he walked in. Beside him stood a young man, also dressed in a tailored suit. He was tall and looked resolute and determined. The acting CEO introduced them to the shareholders. "Good morning. This is Mr. Davis. I believe everyone is familiar with him." The shareholders nodded politely and greeted Jonathan. The acting CEO gestured toward Jacob. "This is Mr. Johnson, the main shareholder of the Franklin Group." He then showed them to their seats and excused himself from the room. Although the shareholders had suspected Jacob would attend the meeting, they hadn't expected to see a young man standing before them. He looked nothing like the boy who couldn't speak. Jacob cleared his throat nervously. "Good morning. I am Jacob Johnson." He took a document from his pocket and placed it on the table. "This is a genetic test report. My mother stored her genetic information in a database, and this report proves that I'm her son." One of the shareholders read the report and looked at Jacob in astonishment. "The report is undeniable. How is it that you can speak?" Jacob smiled confidently. "I recovered from my trauma and regained the ability to speak." The shareholder gave him a broad, fake smile. "Congratulations. It's good to see you again." While the others politely acknowledged Jacob's return, they gave Jonathan a side-eyed glance. It all made sense. Jonathan must have rescued Jacob and wanted to use him to take over the Franklin Group. They weren't overly concerned about such a scenario. It didn't matter who ran the company. The Johnsons had left an ironclad will to ensure that the family would always hold the most shares in the company. The shareholders present at the meeting would never be able to have more shares than the Johnsons. At first, they felt threatened by Jonathan at Jacob's side, but it slowly occurred to them that he ran a successful company and could positively influence the Franklin Group. The Davis Group had been through a highly publicized crisis that had almost ruined the company. Jonathan had saved his business and taken it to a new level. After the crisis, shares in the company had skyrocketed, and it had become an industry leader. It would be good for the Franklin Group to have him take over. Their acting CEO had been doing a decent job, but only worked for his salary. Although the company was doing well, it wasn't going places. Jacob coming out of the woodwork, supported by Jonathan, could give the business the boost it needed. None of the shareholders thought of taking Jacob seriously. He was too young and had no experience. Expecting Jonathan to lead, everyone was astonished when he pushed his chair back and stood up to leave. "Please excuse me. I won't participate in the meeting because I'm not a shareholder. I'll collect Jacob when the meeting is adjourned." With that, he patted Jacob on the shoulder. "I have an appointment with Sumoko. Call me when you're done." The shareholders watched in disbelief as he left the room. The door closed, and they all began to whisper to one another. Jacob tapped on the table to get their attention. Although he had expected their reaction, he still felt uncomfortable and nervous. He took a deep breath and reminded himself that he was the rightful heir to the Johnsons' family empire. But he knew he would have to work hard to be respected. He cleared his throat again. "This is the first shareholder meeting of the year." One of the shareholders abruptly interrupted him. "Mr. Johnson, if I may ask, what happened to you? We were worried about you. Did Mr. Davis rescue you?" Another shareholder nodded. "We are quite curious. You're still so young. How are you going to run a meeting without Mr. Davis?" Jacob tried to reply, but yet another shareholder interjected. "The Franklin Group has been performing relatively well in your absence. It's our responsibility as shareholders to ensure our investors receive their annual dividends. And that's what we've been doing. Why rock the boat now?" Some of them chuckled, and they began to chat about non-business related matters. They weren't interested in having a serious meeting with Jacob. The first shareholder laughed lightly. "I remember how you used to love my wife's pecan pie. Why don't you come to my house today? I'll ask her to bake a fresh one, especially for you." Jacob looked down at his tie and sighed. He leaned over and took a stack of documents out of his briefcase. He handed the documents to each of the shareholders. He spoke in a clear voice. "This is the business plan I drafted concerning the direction I'd like to take with the Franklin Group." Slightly surprised, they reluctantly paged through the documents with lazy eyes. Jacob ignored their attitudes and inserted a memory stick into a computer connected to the projector. "My plan involves the future transformation of the business. I'd like you to take a careful look at the presentation that I prepared for you. I'll fill you in on the details as we review each slide." Jacob started his presentation with a striking market expansion plan. The shareholders stared at the screen, surprised to see he was focusing on an industry they hadn't considered venturing into. One of the shareholders smirked. "Jacob, while we appreciate your enthusiasm, we must remind you that this is a business, not a school project." They began to bombard him with questions. "Who prepared this presentation? Was it you or Mr. Davis?" "The company is currently stable and performing well. It's not necessary to branch out into a different industry." "Yeah, that's true. How about the risks? Have you looked at the market?" "Listen, Jacob, let's sort out the formalities of your shareholder agreement. Mr. Davis brought you here to reclaim your title. You don't need to pitch anything to us." The shareholders leaned back in their chairs, unwilling to listen to him further. Jacob blinked for a second. "As the major shareholder, I expect you to pay attention to my presentation. He glared at everyone individually before continuing. If you choose not to listen, you also choose not to have any say in the matter. I have the authority to push ahead with the plan regardless of your approval. He spoke in a steady voice and had a fierce expression in his eyes. But unfortunately, his age played against him. He didn't look much older than 16 and had the temperament of a teenager. He was young and inexperienced. The shareholder stared at him in shock for a few seconds before bursting into laughter. You're a great kid. You take after your mother. But managing a company isn't child's play. Consider the hard work your mother put in to start this company. You don't want to make any decisions that could potentially destroy it. Let's adjourn this meeting. We haven't seen you for such a long time. Why don't we rather go out for lunch? Jacob stood in front of the screen and realized no one was going to take him seriously. They thought he was just a child trying to play with the big boys. What they didn't know was that he had grown a tough skin. He didn't care about what others thought of him. Although he felt embarrassed and humiliated by their remarks, he wasn't bothered. He wanted to strengthen the Franklin Group and be more than a mere token in the business. He made up his mind to ignore their mockery and doubt. He pointed the laser pen against the screen and continued to speak. As I said earlier, I won't consider your opinions if you don't grant me the respect to listen to what I say. The shareholders laughed at him again. Sure, okay. Go ahead, kid. We're listening. Jacob tightened his grip around the laser pen. He took a deep breath and explained his analysis of the project's potential. His idea was born out of a research project he had done in the past. While looking into the topic, he had seen a market gap that the Franklin Group could easily fill. He had spent many hours researching and fine-tuning the concept. When he had completed the plan, he had given it to Jonathan to review. He hadn't expected him to be very supportive, but to his surprise, Jonathan had shown a keen interest in it. He had even helped him refine the plan, making it more lucrative and sustainable. Jacob had spent several weeks working on the project's feasibility. It wasn't an extensive project, but it required a substantial financial investment that would pay out decent returns once it gained momentum. The capital required to kickstart the project would hardly dent the Franklin Group's coffers. Even so, before implementing a large-scale rollout, he planned a trial run to test the waters first. This would be his first major project. And although he looked young and inexperienced, his enthusiasm and confidence surprised the shareholders. Some of them gradually began to shed their prejudice and pay attention to him. They realized that he wasn't merely reading a script to match the slides on the screen, but was speaking from the heart. It was evident he had researched his idea and that it was well thought out. Eventually, the shareholders quieted down and began to take him seriously. Some of them even asked questions. Why do you think no one else has developed this business model yet? And have you based your ideas on the data currently available? Jacob smiled. They were finally willing to listen. He ignored the contemptuous undertone and readily provided answers. The data used is a result of extensive research. I considered the global industry and used sample data from America, Europe, and Asia. The information is out there, but needs to be assimilated and analyzed sufficiently to develop the business model. One of the shareholders held up his hand and asked, "Are you sure?" Jacob looked him in the eyes. "I'm completely sure of this plan. As you all know, I'm the heir to the Johnson Empire. The Franklin Group only exists because of my mother's blood, sweat, and tears. She sacrificed so much for this company. I won't let anything destroy it." He sighed. "I realize that you may not approve of me or my plan. I also acknowledge that I still have much to learn." He paused momentarily and took a sip of water. "I intend to take over the operations and management of the Franklin Group once I've graduated. I plan to dedicate 1 week a month to learning about the company. And I will also actively participate in every shareholder meeting." The shareholders looked at Jacob and admired his courage. His youthful enthusiasm suddenly made them feel very old. They realized he was determined to make his mark and grow into his role. He was a Johnson after all. He was destined for greatness. The meeting adjourned, and Jacob phoned Jonathan, who had just concluded an intense session of his own. Sumoku's senior executive committee had been in a state because of the turmoil in Cuba. Matthew had passed away, and Theo had disappeared without a trace. Everyone suspected that Jonathan had some involvement in Theo's disappearance. They eagerly accepted his authority to save their positions in the company. Jonathan didn't have time for business politics. He was only interested in achieving results. He had asserted himself as the leader of the Sumoku Corporation and announced the changes in management structure before adjourning the meeting to pick up Jacob. They had a busy day ahead of them. They still had to go downtown to the courthouse to apply for the right to access the Johnson residence and have the property conceded to Jacob. Jacob climbed into the car and breathed a long sigh of relief. "How did the meeting go?" Jonathan asked. Jacob ran his fingers through his hair. "I was nervous at first." He felt comfortable around Jonathan and spoke freely. "They were tough on me. They thought I was only joking and refused to take me seriously. I think they expected you to talk on my behalf." Jonathan had known the shareholders would react that way, and he wanted to warn Jacob. He looked at Jacob's frustrated expression and laughed. "Did you manage to take control of the situation?" Embarrassed, Jacob lowered his eyes. "Not really. They ridiculed me right from the outset. I had to repeat myself many times. They only started paying attention when I was about halfway through. It took them a long time to warm up to the idea and give me valuable input." Jonathan nodded. "You've done well. You know what? My first meeting at the Davis Group was a nightmare." Jacob spun his head to look at Jonathan in surprise. "Really? It was?" "Yeah. I was still in school at the time. My brother had suddenly passed away, and my mother had temporarily taken over as company president. It was a challenging time for her. She had lost her husband and sons, and her health had deteriorated. One day, she fell ill and couldn't attend a very important meeting. I had to take her place. But because I was at school that day, I had to go in my school uniform. There wasn't any time to change. I went straight from a school sports event to the boardroom." He paused momentarily. "She had fainted earlier that morning, and there was no one else to help her. The shareholders were ruthless with me and laughed when I arrived in my school uniform. They even gave the company a derogatory nickname, calling it the Davis School." He sighed sadly. "It was a horrible time. Someone started a rumor that the Davis family had been cursed because the men all died young. They said the company would collapse under my leadership." Jacob listened to Jonathan's story and recalled what Nancy had told him about Jonathan's past. He was shocked. He couldn't imagine how much pressure Jonathan must have been under to stabilize the company back then. He realized that Jonathan's iron fist reputation had been born from how hard he had had to fight to be heard and respected. After Jacob had met with the Franklin Group shareholders that morning, he finally understood how difficult it must have been for Jonathan. He looked at Jonathan with the same determination he had when he had addressed the shareholders. "I won't give up. I'll hold on with everything I have." Jonathan nodded. "Yeah, I believe you will." He laughed before adding, "Besides, your sister will give you endless grief if you don't." Amused, Jacob told him about his ideas of managing the company better. He was so engrossed in their conversation that he only realized they had reached the courthouse when Jonathan parked the car and got out. They walked up the stone staircase and met with a lawyer who had been waiting for them. Jonathan had prepared everything in advance, and Jacob only had to sign the application forms and present himself in person to one of the administration clerks. The lawyer then submitted the application and told him it would take a day for the court to review and approve it. They left the courthouse and went back to their hotel. Nancy was nowhere to be seen. Jonathan rubbed his head out of frustration. Jacob glanced at him, having guessed why he looked so annoyed. "I suppose she went to visit Brightstar's Houston office." Jonathan nodded. He had married a workaholic. Nancy was already in her second trimester of pregnancy yet she ran around as if there was nothing to worry about. Jonathan hung his coat up and was about to take his phone out to call her when he heard her voice at the door. As she entered the room, the strap of her bag caught on the door handle. She unhooked it and smiled at her husband. "Hi, honey. I was bored, so I decided to go for a walk." Not wanting to tell her that her bodyguard had been reporting back to him on her movements all day, he shrugged and kissed her gently on the forehead. "Everything went well today. We'll all return to the courthouse tomorrow to collect the order that concedes the property to Jacob and get the keys." Nancy smiled excitedly. She hadn't been back to her old home in over 4 years. Everything had been left behind in a great hurry, and she expected to find it just as she had left it. She couldn't wait to finally have the chance to unlock the memories that her childhood home held for her. She expected the excitement would keep her awake that night, but the babies had drained her energy, and she quickly fell asleep. Her belly had grown much larger as her pregnancy had progressed. The triplets often jostled for space, but weren't as busy at night as during the day. The following day, they ate a light breakfast in the hotel dining room and prepared to go to the courthouse. They found the lawyer waiting for them with an envelope tucked under his arm. He handed them the envelope and explained that they still had to submit an approved application to be stamped before a court clerk could accompany them to the house and hand over the keys to them. It didn't take long to finalize the documentation, and the court clerk arranged a time to meet with them at the house. A heavy padlock secured the gates to the house, and the clerk swiftly unlocked it. For the first time in years, the gate swung open, and Jacob saw the overgrown pathway that led to the front door. He thanked the clerk and signed the final document. The clerk handed him a bunch of keys and left. The Johnson residence once again belonged to its rightful owner. Nancy stood beside him. Tears filled her eyes, and she clasped his hand tightly. He smiled at her. "Let's go home." Jonathan followed a few paces behind them, keeping a respectful distance to give the siblings space to reminisce. The garden had become overgrown with weeds, and the immaculately manicured lawns had grown waist-high. Withered plants lined the pathway, making the property seem desolate and somewhat eerie. They made their way up the stairs to the front door. Jacob placed his finger on a small scanner and waited for the door to open. It took another 2 tries for the scanner to recognize his fingerprint, and they finally heard the bolt slide back inside the lock. Nancy breathed a sigh of relief. Stark seemed to have neglected to remove Jacob's fingerprints from the system. As soon as the door opened, Nancy felt her heart skip a beat, and she held her breath. She tried to recall how long it had been since she had walked through the front door of her childhood home. Back then, she had been working in a research and development lab. She imagined the sound of her parents' voices as they chattered, and she smelled the aroma of dinner cooking in the kitchen. A young Jacob raced around the house with his toy figurines while taunting and teasing her. She glanced at the young man standing beside her. He was almost 6 feet tall and had matured so much. Holding hands, they walked into the entrance hall and began to look through the many rooms. It was as if time had stood still. Stark had left in a hurry, and everything stood precisely as it had on the day he had closed the door behind him for the last time. A cup of tea sat neatly on the small table in the living room. The tea had been half finished, and over time the water had evaporated, and all that remained was a dark red stain inside the cup. A thick layer of dust covered everything in the room. The beautiful antique Parisian carpet had disappeared into the floorboards from the heavy dust that clung to the fabric. A rare oil painting hung on the wall. Its bright colors contrasted the dull, dusty furnishings and seemed even more vivid than before. Nancy recalled that her mother had bought it at an auction. She had bid a high price for it and had been thrilled to take it home. She had initially wanted to hang it in the study, but Nancy and Jacob had convinced her to hang it in the living room instead. They carefully walked around the room and gazed at the ornaments on the side table. Nancy ran her fingers along the soft leather couches they had once sat on and glanced at the bookshelves full of books they had once read. Jonathan followed quietly behind them and sized up the layout of each room. He remembered that he had liked Nancy when he had met her in her previous life. It had been many years ago, and she was still a little girl at the time. He glanced at a photo in a frame perched on one of the small side tables, wondering what she had looked like as she grew up. Nancy and Jacob saw the photo and cautiously picked it up. Jacob wiped away the dust, revealing the faces of 5 people. The picture had been taken roughly 10 years ago. He had been only 6 years old at that time. He sat on Edward's lap, while Nancy and Stark stood in front of him. Their mother, Lily, had hooked her arm in Edward's arm, and she smiled happily. Little did they know at that time that Stark would eventually turn into a monster hell-bent on destroying their family. Afraid of Nancy becoming too overwhelmed with emotions, Jacob quickly turned the photo frame over and led her to the study on the first floor. Although they called it a study, it had been used as a room for music and art. A grand piano stood in the middle of the room. An artist's easel leaned against the opposite wall next to the window. As children, Nancy had practiced playing the piano while Jacob had worked on his sketches. A ray of sun shone through the dirty window pane. The dancing light reminded her of the hours she had spent practicing. Her mother would often take a break from her work to listen to Nancy's progress. Sometimes, Edward had sat in the comfortable armchair in the corner of the room and complimented her on her beautiful playing. Jacob used to love to put his head against the soundboard and listen to the keys hit the hammers against the strings. She smiled and walked up to the piano. She pulled out the piano stool and gently brushed the dust off the lid before opening it. The dust made her cough slightly, and she sat down as she gingerly played a note. The piano had become out of tune for the years of not being played, but Nancy didn't care. Her fingers skimmed across the keys. Jonathan leaned against the doorframe and watched her play. Jacob sat in front of the easel and closed his eyes. Jonathan had heard Nancy play a few times, and they had even played a duet once before. But at that moment, he knew she was playing something he had never been a part of. She relived a part of her previous life and became lost in her memories. She reached the end of the piece of music and transitioned into another one. She looked up, and her eyes locked with Jonathan's. She saw a tenderness in his gaze that touched her heart. Things had changed. She now had a different life. Although it was nothing like the one she had thought she would have, she felt grateful to have someone to hold her hand and be by her side. She stood up and smiled. He walked over and hugged her. Jacob didn't say anything. Instead, he opened a violin case that was against the wall and took out an exquisite antique violin. Nancy glanced over Jonathan's shoulder and suddenly remembered how she had insisted that Edward buy it for her. They had gone to the music store to buy her a new violin, and although the one the sales assistant had recommended played better, the antique violin had caught her eye. In the end, Edward had reluctantly agreed. She took the violin from Jacob and plucked at the strings. Jacob then handed her the bow, which she tightened before rubbing a small resin block over the horsehair. She positioned the violin under her chin and slowly ran the bow across one of the strings. Looking at Jonathan, she smiled again. "You've never heard me play the violin before. Shall I play something?" He nodded. "Yeah, I'd love to hear you play." Nancy ran the bow over each string and turned the screws at the bridge to tune them. She took a deep breath and began to play a melancholic melody that filled the room. Jonathan walked over to the piano and sat down. He stretched his fingers and began to play an accompaniment to Nancy's tune. The sound of their instruments blended in perfect harmony as the somber melody echoed through the house. Jacob picked up his phone and quietly filmed them playing together. He felt his eyes well up with tears. They had experienced so much hardship and heartache, yet they had come through it and had finally found happiness. The music gradually ended, and Nancy gently put the violin and bow back in the case. The eerie stillness in the house had disappeared, and it seemed as if they had breathed life back into it. Jonathan stood up and smiled as he took Nancy's hand in his. "My darling wife, you have too many talents. I feel inferior." She smiled back at him. "But you play the piano beautifully." He chuckled. "It's the only instrument I ever had a chance to learn." Most of my childhood was spent learning martial arts and playing sports. I'm afraid I'm not as refined as you." They hooked arms and wandered up to the second floor. Nancy frowned as she passed Stark's room. Jacob had walked ahead of them and quickly closed the door. "I'll arrange for someone to clean the room out." She nodded and continued down the hallway. Jonathan poked his head around the doorway into another room. "Where's your room?" She looked at him and smiled. "Take a guess." He peered into each room and eventually stopped at one toward the end of the hallway. "It must be this one." Nancy laughed. "How did you know?" He shrugged, picked up a half-built robot, and held it in his hand. "It's obvious." She beamed a happy smile at him. He rubbed her hair and wondered what it had been like before her family's troubles had begun. He imagined her sitting at her desk, with a bright spotlight focused on her mechanical invention as she carefully tightened a screw in place. He longed to see her without the pain she carried deep in her heart. He wondered if she would have liked him if they had met back then. "Nancy, do you think you would have been interested in me if I had asked you out when you were still in college?" He recalled the time he had hidden under the roof to avoid the rain. She had ignored him as if he hadn't existed. Nancy smiled at Jonathan's question. "I think so." He raised his eyebrows. "Do you mean to say you'd have fallen for me?" She nodded. "Yeah, but I suppose even if I hadn't agreed to go out with you, you'd probably have found a way to make me agree." Jacob smiled. "Come on, Jonathan, don't be so overbearing." Nancy winked to Jacob. "You should take a page out of his book. I'm sure he has some useful tips on how to impress a woman." Suddenly, she remembered something. "Didn't you have something with a girl during the summer?" Jacob shrugged and shook his head. "That was long ago. I have more important things to focus on now. I don't have time for a relationship." Nancy grinned at him. "Is that so?" He looked at her with a solemn expression. "Yeah, I realized it at the shareholders' meeting yesterday. I don't want to let Mom down." She immediately understood what he meant and patted him gently on the arm. "Mom and Dad would be very proud of us." They had reached the end of the hallway, and Nancy opened the door to a small room with floor-to-ceiling shelving. Her eyes lit up as she switched on the light to reveal dozens of bags packed neatly on each shelf. Some were small and delicate handbags, while others were styled as backpacks and even larger shopping bags. "Esther designed all of these bags." Nancy pointed to a rack of dresses hanging at the back of the room. "And my mother had these dresses custom designed for me." As part of Stark's ruse to appear like a loving fiancé, he had left all of Nancy's belongings in place. A few trophies sat on one of the shelves, and there was a jewelry box behind two small glass cabinets. Jonathan reached over and picked up an old photo album. He leafed through the pages and smiled at the photos. Jacob peered over his shoulder and pointed to one of the pictures. "Look at this one. Nancy was only 4 years old and had wet her pants." Nancy tried to snatch the photo album from Jonathan's hands, but he lifted it from her reach. In the photo, Nancy was riding a small wooden rocking horse. A dark watermark could be seen running down the sides of the horse. Embarrassed, she smacked Jacob on the arm. "You hadn't even been born then. How would you know what happened?" Jacob laughed. "Esther told me all about it. She said you wanted to ride the horse so badly that you forgot to go to the bathroom. It was too late when you realized you needed to go." Jonathan chuckled and slowly looked at each photograph, one at a time. He hadn't been part of her previous life. Seeing her childhood photos gave him a sense of connection to it and made it seem more real. He closed the photo album and put it back on the shelf. He turned to Nancy. "Are you hungry?" She sighed and rubbed her belly. "Yeah. Shall we go somewhere?" Jonathan shook his head. "Let's order in. I'll arrange for a cleaning crew to dust the house and freshen it up. Let's sleep at home tonight." Surprised, she smiled at him. "I'd very much like that." Although they had reclaimed their home, they wouldn't have much time to stay there. Jacob had to get back to school, and she had her work. She didn't want to waste the precious time they had. The cleaners arrived before midday and began to clean the house. They started with the kitchen and dining room before moving on to the rest of the house. Jacob sat at his usual seat at the dining table opposite Nancy, and Jonathan pulled out the chair next to her. As he sat down, Jacob looked up at him and grinned. "That used to be my father's favorite seat." Jacob's feelings for Jonathan were quite complicated. If it hadn't been for Jonathan's extreme method to force him out of his old mental state, his life would have never changed. Jonathan was also more than 10 years older than him. He considered him to be more of a father figure than a brother-in-law. He had also taught Jacob everything about managing a large company. Jonathan wasn't just his sister's husband, he was also his mentor. Jonathan gave him a sense of security he had desperately needed. Hearing Jacob's comment, Jonathan smiled and patted Nancy on the shoulder. "Your sister has called me Dad once or twice." She gasped and blushed. "Don't teach him such vulgarities." Jonathan grinned. "It's nothing he doesn't already know." Embarrassed, Jacob didn't know where to look. He had also learned from his previous conversations not to disagree with Nancy. He waved a dismissive hand. "I don't know what you're talking about." Nancy giggled and decided to give up and tuck into the plate of food in front of her. She thought about the happy conversations that had taken place around the dining room table and suddenly felt nostalgic for her childhood days. But before she could delve into her memories, the babies in her tummy kicked and reminded her of her new life. She rubbed her belly and sighed. "They're so restless right now. I don't think I can wait another 3 months." Jonathan stood up and gently massaged her shoulders. "I'm afraid it'll be even more tiring once they're born. Have some more to eat. You need to keep your strength up." Jacob watched them interact and smiled happily. As long as Nancy was happy, he knew their future would be perfect. Although he didn't have the talent to learn about medicine as his forefathers had, he had inherited many other traits unique to the Johnson family. He was determined to reclaim control of the Franklin Group and make a success of it. Later that evening, Nancy took Jonathan to her bedroom. The cleaners had put fresh bedding on the bed, but the rest of her belongings lay precisely where she had left them all those years ago. She lay down on the bed and stretched out. Jonathan plumped up a pillow and lay down beside her. He leaned over and kissed her on the cheek. She blushed and pulled away from him slightly. For a brief moment, she had forgotten she was his wife. She was only a young girl with a passion for robotics. He propped himself up and whispered in her ear, "Nancy, we're in your old room. Let's make out." The next day, Jacob went to the Franklin Group offices again to address some details that needed his attention. His plan had been officially publicized, and although the acting CEO would be in charge of the project's progress, Jacob didn't want his first piece of work to be completely handed over to others. Jonathan took advantage of their time in Houston to finalize the arrangements between the Davis Group and Sumoko, while Nancy did a bit of publicity for Brightstar. A week later, Jacob was back in New York. He had been reluctant to part with his family home, but he had to get back to school. Thousands of miles away, Oliver was still searching for Zoe. He suspected he wasn't the only one, and that some members of the Davidson family also had an interest in her whereabouts. But neither he nor they had so far found a thing. In a basement somewhere in Havana was a woman they were all looking for. Several days ago, after Gavin had threatened Oliver to force him to make a choice, Zoe had started bleeding. She had lost a lot of blood, and Gavin had called for the doctor to come and examine her. Dr. Carolyn Watts had several years of experience in obstetrics, but even she was shocked to see so much blood. She had brought some of her medical tools with her, but the basement room was no hospital, and the facilities available to her were limited. Carolyn and Gavin carried Zoe carefully to the bed, and the doctor cut off her clothes as quickly as she could so that she could examine her. Gavin watched from the other side of the room. "If this woman dies, all my hard work will be in vain," he thought worriedly. and I don't intend to stay in this miserable place for the rest of my life. If that baby of hers, Oliver's baby, dies, then he'll kill me." Gavin knew very well what Oliver was capable of. He had known the man for years, and he had grown to hate him. He knew he was taking a great risk, but he had to do it. There was no hope left in his life. His family's position in society had fallen, and his sister was dead, thanks to Oliver. Even the only woman he had ever loved had turned out to be his own cousin. His world was in a mess. But if he had to die, he would make sure he dragged Oliver down with him. Mackenzie had liked Oliver for years, and yet he had killed her. How could I, her elder brother, sit back and let that man get away with her murder? Zoe's child was Gavin's bargaining chip. He had already dealt a blow to Oliver once, and he wondered if he could use it again to completely destroy Oliver. He watched Caroline as she frantically tried to stem the bleeding. "Whatever happens, Dr. Watts, you make sure that child survives. Do you hear me?" "I'll do my best." She checked the heart monitor and frowned. "I've stemmed the bleeding, but she's lost too much blood. She needs a blood transfusion." Gavin grunted indignantly. "Why is this damn woman so troublesome?" "I've been tending to her since she became pregnant. She has type A blood, which isn't rare, but I'm concerned it'll take too long to receive some from the blood bank." Gavin began to roll up his sleeve. "I have type A blood. Take some of mine." Carolyn's relief was evident on her face, but she didn't know if Gavin had given blood before or whether he would be up to it. "She needs 20 fluid ounces." "That won't kill me." He secured his shirt sleeve and thrust his arm toward the doctor. Zoe was only 7 months into her pregnancy. If the baby had to be delivered prematurely, it was unlikely they would survive under such primitive conditions. Carolyn wished she had access to a hospital incubator. As for Gavin, he needed the child to live so that he could use it against Oliver. Without the baby, he had nothing. Carolyn got to work attaching the drip to Gavin's vein, and as soon as his blood was coursing through the tube, she measured 20 fluid ounces, inserted a clean needle into the vein of Zoe's inner elbow, and transferred the blood. She kept a close eye on the heart monitor, and when all the blood had been transfused, she frowned. "I'm going to have to draw another 5 fluid ounces. She's not responding well enough yet." Having 20 fluid ounces of blood extracted from his body had left Gavin feeling a little dizzy, but he knew he would have to give more if Zoe and the baby were to have any chance. "Okay, take some more." Caroline drew 5 more fluid ounces, which left him feeling sick as well as dizzy, so he went to the next room to lie down for a while. With 25 fluid ounces of Gavin's blood flowing through her veins, Zoe's condition began to improve, and despite the adverse conditions, she was soon much better. She opened her eyes and blinked until they came into focus. "I'm still alive. What about my baby?" "Yes, you are. You and both babies are safe now," Carolyn assured her. "Both babies? I'm having twins?" She let out a long sigh of relief, and then she took in her surroundings. "Where are we?" "You're still in the basement. You lost a lot of blood, and Mr. Sloan donated some of his own to you. How are you feeling?" "I had a blood transfusion?" Zoe looked around at the sparse room and its lack of medical amenities. "Yes, you did. Mr. Sloan felt dizzy afterward and went to lie down next door. You're weak, so make sure you stay in bed for the rest of the day. Don't get up." Zoe nodded and thought about what Gavin had done for her. He was her kidnapper, so she knew he didn't really care about her or her babies. He had done it only because they would have been worthless to him if they had died. Carolyn left the room, and Zoe closed her eyes and gently stroked her protruding belly. "We're going to have to work hard to survive this ordeal. All 3 of us." Gavin slept until the following morning, and when he woke up, he felt much better. He ate his breakfast alone, and then he went to see Zoe. He found her stroking her belly and singing some kind of lullaby. He sneered and stood beside her bed, looking down at her threateningly. "Is that how you teach babies these days?" She looked up, but she didn't comment. She just gave him a look of disdain. He had brought her some food, and he placed it on the bed. "Sit up and eat. Or do you want me to feed you?" Zoe had no intention of letting him feed her, so she tried to sit up. She had remained in bed as Caroline had ordered, and she felt stiff and sore. She still felt weak, so she struggled to pull herself up. She had never been so hungry in all her life. Gavin had told the maids not to give her any food or water, so it had been a long time since she had last eaten. She was desperate to eat the food he had brought her. Gavin watched her slowly pull herself up into a sitting position. It took so long that he began to get irritated, and he turned to leave the room. But then he turned back and went to stuff a cushion behind her back, helping to prop her up. "Does it really have to take you so long?" She heard the frustration in his voice, but at last she was sitting up in bed. Ignoring his remark, she picked up the box of food and began to eat.